On January 18th of 2023, police officers in Georgia shot an unarmed 26-year-old protester 57 times. The officers said that they were fired at, but an official report later found that that was a lie, and that there was no gunpowder residue on the man's hand. This was how police took Manuel Terán, aka Tortuguita's life, while they protested the creation of the police training facility now known as Cop City. The pushback against this facility still continues today, and the story gets worse. My name is Isaias Hernandez, and this is Queer Brown Vegan, my platform to bring you environmental education that's focusing on intersectional issues rather than ignoring them. If you like what you see here, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because it helps grow my channel and bring you more educational content. Cop City, the $90 million project set to be placed in the Weelaunee Forest of Atlanta, Georgia. This forest is also known as one of the city's 4 lungs, helping keep microclimate cool and stable. If you can imagine, it's not the best place for new development. Atlanta residents have made their voices heard, only to be ignored by their city. And let's talk about it. What exactly is Cop City? It's a proposed police training facility that was approved by Atlanta's City Council back in September of 2021. And this site would help train armed forces worldwide, including the Israeli Defense Forces. And in the US, where Black and Hispanic people are targeted by police twice as often, people feel skeptical about how a facility like this solves any problem. Say what you want about the intentions of Cop City, but there are huge problems with the location that was selected. Introducing the Weelaunee Forest. This is the largest green space in Atlanta. It's been used for community events, help cool the urban areas around it, and cleans up air pollution. Cop City would do irreparable damage to the ecosystem and the community around it. This forest is surrounded by the mostly Black residents that are at or below the poverty line. This is a huge resource to them, and Cop City would change that landscape forever. The murder of Manuel Terán, aka Tortuguita, sparked a change in everything. This is the first documented case of an environmental activist being murdered by police while protesting in the United States. Tortuguita was 26 years old and a graduate of Florida State University, the same age as I am, and as well as a forest defender, part of the Stop Cop City movement. After his murder, the police lied. In official reports from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, they made claims that Tortuguita shot officers, said they found bullet shells in the tent, and that the police were acting in self-defense. Conveniently, no one had body cams on during the shooting, and no one else was present besides the police and the protesters they were clearing. After he was murdered, an independent autopsy found there was no gunpowder residue on Tortuguita's hands. They also found the bullet entry wounds were on his palms, suggesting he held his hands up when cops shot him 57 times. When Atlanta released body cam footage following the murder, you can hear police say, "You effed your own officer up." This suggests that the police officer who was shot was actually shot by another cop, not Tortuguita. The murder of this young Venezuelan man sparked backlash across the US as many more joined the movement to stop Cop City. The state of Georgia acquitted all the officers involved of the committing of any crime, and unfortunately it got worse from there. What's happening in Atlanta has become an open look at what happens when elected officials use police and government to force their own agenda, instead of responding to what the community wants and needs. When it came time to vote on funding for Cop City in the city council, Atlanta residents set records. In early June, an additional $67 million for construction was being voted on over 1,000 people showed up to leave a comment, the majority of which were opposed. But you know what happened? City Hall opened its door, late keeping people outside for hours, food and drinks weren't allowed inside, and they only had one sign-up sheet for comments, ensuring that some of the hundreds of voices wouldn't be heard. In the end, City Council members voted to approve the funding 11-4. And why? Because they didn't want to have people show up again and voice their disapproval. So democracy and this idea of being represented by government is being challenged by Cop City. The government is literally ignoring the people. This has been a travesty of justice in so many ways, and it still manages to get worse. And let's look at what happened next. The RICO law is meant to penalize organized crime, but that's exactly what Georgia's Attorney General Chris Carr used to intimidate environmental protesters. They handed out 61 indictments because of efforts to block Cop City, with up to 20 years in prison. When the community responded to fundraise for bail of these innocent protesters trying to elevate the voices for the community, a SWAT team showed up to arrest the group organizing it. 5 people were given domestic terrorism charges. All of this has caught the attention of organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union that are very clear. These charges were excessively punishing, they were a scare tactic, and they have no place in a country that protects freedom of speech. The indictment describes mutual aid and community care as hallmarks of criminal enterprises, which is pretty ridiculous unless they'd like to arrest nonprofits next. They turn to things like peaceful protests, buying food, and speech into felonies. All in all, the state is trying to squash dissent, which is also what these cops are going to be trained to do in Cop City. So this is bad for democracy, bad for the environment, bad for people, and good for cops and military forces? Where are we today? The movement to stop Cop City hasn't disappeared, and organizers are actually planning new events. Organizers submitted a formal referendum with over 100,000 signatures, more than the number of votes in the last mayoral election. Yet that was ignored, so they're now focusing on community building protests and events for the public to get people involved. 2 years worth of pushing back against Cop City, and blocked by the city at every stop, the Atlanta community is hanging on. There were recently 4 days of events, and on November 13th, cops tear gas innocent protesters. Without normal people that speak up and involve, this is exactly what would keep happening. More violence, more environmental destruction, more people being displaced and arrested in their involvement for trying to fight for a better future. And we can do much better as people. For us on the outside, here's what community organizations are telling us that we can do as people that don't live in that state. Call Mayor Dickinson at 404-330-6100 and tell him to end the lease with the Atlanta Police Foundation. Pressure the builders to drop their contracts. Sign the petition asking corporations to divest from that contract in the city council, and tell them to put in another vote. You can visit the link in the description to learn more on how you can do any of these to comfort of your own bedroom, such as websites like communitymovementbuilders.org/stop-cop-city. Now, the death of the environmental protester to me really hits at home, because I think that we need to recognize that white supremacy and police brutality and the border and surveillance industry are deeply intertwined in the fight of climate justice. Knowing the fact that the US committed a violent death on an individual means that we are not safe as environmentalists. If we continue to see the escalation and the accumulation of power within police force systems, we as peaceful protesters and organizers and people who provide mutual aid are at risk of being displaced, federally criminally charged, or even further enough, being murdered by this system. Climate justice is dismantling white supremacy. Dismantling white supremacy is dismantling the police and border and surveillance system that is targeting Black, Indigenous people of color. And if we are not able to make those links today, right now, as environmentalists, that how does social racial justice intertwine with climate, this is a huge issue. It's an issue for our communities, it's an issue for the ecosystems, it's an issue for future generations of how we're going to protest. And I feel that as we continue to become a very more divided and politicized country here in the US amongst Democrats and Republicans, we need to organize better, we need to continue to pressure, we need to continue to divest. And also what we're seeing right now with Israel and Gaza is a really great example of this, right? Like the BDS movement is a perfect example of how people and consumers are boycotting. A lot of these extractive companies are giving millions of dollars to fund genocide. And I think that for us, we have that power to actually take action, whether or not we're there in person in Atlanta or in the forest. We have to remember that all of us here are intertwined in the same fight, which is why I wanted to bring this topic to you all, because I think it is important for all of us to engage in these discussions. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like the video, leave a comment with something you'd learn or topics you'd like for me to explore, and subscribe to the channel if you liked what you saw. Support the Stop Cop City movement, and let me know what your thoughts are.